Hello, this video will be on standard costing for IME 239. It's an introduction and some definitions. So as you all have just studied fully allocated costs, it's important to understand why we're studying standard costs as well. So really, what is the right way to allocate common costs? Common costs are those that support a variety of products, like the fixed manufacturing costs. They support all processes, all activities, all departments. What is the right way to allocate common costs? Well, many analysts have taken a look at this, many companies, and what folks have found is that really it depends on the company and what works for the company. So standard costing is important and beneficial because it forces managers to take a look into aspects of the company like processes and purchasing trends, costs, and cost control. And those are areas that might not get a lot of attention otherwise. And that promotes efficiency through observing inefficiencies and or observing efficiencies, just observing when there are variances or inequities. Another key part of standard costing is the ability to budget and then determine actual values and look into the variance between the budget and the actual value. And that's called cost variance. So what is a standard cost? A standard cost is a planned or expected cost per one good unit of product. And that's often part of a budget. So a budget is completed at the beginning of a year or a quarter, and it says this is what we think we're going to spend in the year or the quarter. So a standard cost is an estimated future cost. It's an estimate for the next year or the next quarter. A standard cost is composed of three types of standard costs. So material costs, labor costs, and overhead costs. And then once standard costs are discovered, then they're used to determine cost variance. And that's going to be looked at later in videos. But essentially what cost variance is it measures the difference in actual costs versus the expected or standard costs. So this is just an image of the types of standard costs. As I said, there are three types of standard costs: direct materials costs, direct labor, and overhead costs. And then overhead is broken down into variable manufacturing overhead and fixed manufacturing overhead. And each of those standard costs is essentially calculated by taking a standard quantity and multiplying it by a standard cost per that quantity. So you can see that that's pretty obvious in direct materials. In direct labor, the quantity is hours, the cost is the rate per hour, and so on and so forth. So how are standards determined? Well, standard prices are essentially determined using a couple of different methods. Historical figures, and that's taking past figures to forecast the future. Supplier contract prices, marketplace price trends, payroll records. And then standard quantities can be determined using, again, historical figures, product specifications like a bill of materials from IME 223, and engineering change orders, which is a type of configuration management. Standard quantities can also be determined using time studies, which is also from IME 223. That's typically more for like labor hours, and operations flow diagram. So jumping right into the first type of standard cost, we have material cost. Material cost is essentially the direct cost of materials for one unit, one good unit produced. That's composed of two standards: the standard quantity of materials, so the standard quantity of material to make one good unit, including waste and spoilage allowances, and it's also composed of the standard price per unit of material, and that's the final delivered cost of the material, including shipping and insurance and all of the travel prices. So what the goal is to take that standard quantity and standard price and determine how much one unit is going to cost in terms of materials. So for our example, we're going to be going through actually throughout the entire process with a Rubik's Cube. So at the top you have the equation, the standard quantity times the standard price, and that gives you the standard material cost. And let's imagine that we are just making the black plastic pieces on a Rubik's Cube, that maybe the Rubik's Cube is assembled somewhere else or at some point later in time. So we have a 3x3 Rubik's Cube that has 26 black plastic pieces of polypropylene that weigh 0.0136 pounds per piece. The supplier has promised a price of $1,000 per ton if we purchase 2 tons. What's the standard material cost of the plastic pieces? The standard quantity of material, we're trying to understand with those 26 polypropylene pieces that are included in a Rubik's Cube. First of all, how much quantity of material is that? How much is that going to cost us per unit, and then, or per quantity of material, and then how much does that cost per unit? So the first equation shows the 26 polypropylene pieces. Those weigh 0.0136 pounds per piece, and that gives a 0.35 pound per unit equivalent. The standard price of material, so if you look at the standard quantity, you see that it's in pounds per unit. So we want the price to also be in pounds, some units of pounds. So we have $1,000 per ton that's given to us. So we can multiply it by 1 ton over 2,000 pounds, or essentially divide it by 2,000 pounds, and that gives you $0.5 per pound. So the standard material cost is then the multiplication of that 0.345 pounds per unit and the $0.5 per pound. And that'll give you dollars per unit. And you can see that calculation down below. That gives $0.177 per unit. And really that makes sense because you wouldn't expect those black plastic pieces to be a huge cost contributor when creating Rubik's Cubes. So here's a try it yourself problem, and you can go ahead and either pause it now and go ahead and figure it out, or I'll read it aloud and then finish it up, take it to class, and you all will go over it there. So a company that manufactures utensils for children and babies called the Spoonie Company has developed a new baby spoon that's made solely of pure medical grade thermoplastic elastomer, or TPE, for a softer mouthfeel and better grip. The TPE supplier requires a minimum of 50 kilograms in a purchase, and Spoonie purchases that minimum amount for use over the quarter for $366. So that's that 50 kilograms for $366. Each spoon requires 12.5 grams of TPE. So part A says calculate the material cost for 1 spoon. Self-explanatory. Part B says if the Spoonie Company uses all 50 kilograms during the quarter, determine how many units can be produced. Really the justification behind that is just, hey, we have this amount of material, how many units can we produce with it? So I'll go ahead and pause the video now, and good luck.